Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at the ASICS SuperBlast and NovaBlast 4. Let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say that these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. Now, the reason we're taking a look at these two shoes in particular is both the SuperBlast and NovaBlast are highly cushioned neutral daily trainers, which are surprisingly versatile, great for runners that want a ton of stack height underfoot, but also want a shoe that can pick up the pace as well without having to go to a super shoe or a race day shoe. Now, both of these kind of fall into that category in my opinion. However, there are some key differences between them. The first key difference is the price, and this may make up people's minds right off the bat. The SuperBlast is a rather expensive $200, while the NovaBlast is a much more reasonable $140, which is on par with most other typical daily trainers. Now, for $200, the SuperBlast does give you a ton of stack height. This has a whopping 45.5 millimeters of stack height with an 8 millimeter drop, while the NovaBlast is not far behind it with 4 less millimeters of stack height. We have 41.5 with an 8 millimeter drop as well. The NovaBlast is the heavier shoe. Despite having less stack height, it comes in at a very respectable 9.2 ounces, which is very good for a daily trainer that is this large. And then if we go to the SuperBlast, this is surprisingly light. It is only 8.4 ounces, despite having a whopping 46 millimeters of stack overall, which I think is just quite cool. Both shoes did fit true to size for me and have a standard fit. They weren't too narrow and they weren't too wide. The only minor thing I'll say is I think maybe the NovaBlast has a smidge more room in the toe box compared to the SuperBlast. For me, the big difference was really what the upper is made out of. On the SuperBlast, we have a woven jacquard upper, and the material itself is fairly breathable, especially when you compare it to the NovaBlast, which has a more tightly woven fabric upper, with the only ventilation really occurring in these punched out or holes in the toe box, making the NovaBlast warmer compared to the SuperBlast. And I do prefer the SuperBlast experience just because it has a little bit better airflow. The tongues on both the NovaBlast and SuperBlast are gusseted and are very similar. You do have some foam blocks towards the top with some open mesh towards the bottom. The big difference is the NovaBlast has a few more foam blocks towards the top of the tongue compared to the SuperBlast. I don't think this makes a massive difference, but I do like this particular setup as it's very thin but does give you enough cushioning with those small foam blocks towards the top to give you some lace pressure protection. Moving towards the back of the shoe, both heel counters have a decent amount of structure to them with a slight edge to the SuperBlast. However, the NovaBlast does have more padding in the ankle and Achilles section, giving you a little bit more comfort. The lockdown was good on both, but I do think the SuperBlast has a slight edge because of its enhanced heel counter, and I do prefer the upper here just because it has a little bit more ventilation. Both midsoles here are extremely large and give you plenty of cushioning. On the NovaBlast, we have a full-length Flight Foam Blast Plus Eco midsole, which gives you a nice little energy return. It's fairly soft and very comfortable. However, that is very different from the SuperBlast, which has two different kinds of foam in the midsole. There's no plate or anything like that. You have a top layer. This orange foam is going to be Flight Foam Turbo, a similar kind that we see on some of ASICS Super Race Day shoes. I think with the newest edition, it's Flight Foam Turbo Plus, but either way, you get the picture. You get a really responsive foam on top, and then the bottom layer is going to be Flight Foam Blast Plus, a similar kind to we see in the NovaBlast. So 2 layers of foam here, but the big story is the Flight Foam Turbo, which is the large orangish red foam on top, is going to be lighter and more responsive compared to the midsole we see on the NovaBlast. The other thing is the SuperBlast is much more rigid and stiff. Again, there is no plate, no plastic plate, no carbon fiber plate in this shoe, but the shoe itself is quite rigid and stiff, which I think lends itself to being more aggressive and more stable compared to the NovaBlast, which is going to be a little bit more forgiving. It's a fairly stiff shoe, but much more flexible compared to what we see on the SuperBlast. Moving on to the outsoles, yes, I know the traction patterns look similar. However, I think there's a slight edge here for the NovaBlast just because you have a bit more rubber, and I found it to grip the ground better as well. So yes, they're similar, but I think the NovaBlast does a better job giving you traction. So which shoe would I rather go with? Well, I do have to go with the SuperBlast. Yes, I know it's $60 more and it's rather expensive as a whole, but hear me out. It's surprisingly versatile. It's lighter, faster, more responsive, and also more stable. And for being a non-plated trainer, you really do feel that rocker geometry. And for me, I kind of was able to use it for almost everything from slow runs all the way up to almost race pace. This shoe is just fun, especially because it's only 8.4 ounces and you have over 45.5 millimeters of stack height with a really responsive foam underneath. Just makes for just a fun running experience. However, that is not to say that NovaBlast is a bad shoe. I really like this, and if that $60 means a lot to you, the NovaBlast I think is a perfect option. This is definitely one of my more recommended trainers at the $140 price point. This I think is extremely versatile as well. It does well at those faster paces, but I think between these two, if you want to slow it down, the NovaBlast does shine a bit better in that category. However, like I mentioned before, this is surprisingly versatile. The forefoot is incredibly wide. You have a ton of volume to the midsole, and I really do like Flight Foam Blast Plus. Gives you a nice level of cushion and energy return, just not as good compared to the Flight Foam Turbo like we see in the SuperBlast. Well, that concludes the review. Let me know in the comments which shoe you prefer. I would love to hear from you. Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.